Hello and welcome back. This is Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports in Westfield, Indiana, and you are watching Marksman TV. You're here for this week's episode of Counter Talk. In this video, we're going to be talking about the state of the industry as of March 2017, which is now about 3 months post-election. We're going to talk about the things that are currently going on, the buying trends within the industry, what's going on in the larger scale with the larger manufacturers and retailers, and we'll just take a general look. Now we're going to do this in the style of kind of on my desktop here, so I'm going to bring you in. The audio is going to be pretty bad because I don't have a microphone, so I'm going to be recording the rest of this over the microphone on my computer. But anyway, stick tight and we will get into that right now.
All right, so what we have right here is the data that's provided by NICS, which of course is the system that does the background checks. This is a good indication of how background checks have varied over every month, over every year, since about 1998 up until the data for February of 2017 is posted. We're still waiting on the data for March, of course, because March is not over yet. So let's focus on these numbers here. What we have is November and December of 2015 versus the same months of 2016. And then we have January and February of 2016 versus the same months in 2017. As you can see in November, there was a pretty significant increase in the amount of background checks conducted, and that really mostly took place in the first 8 days. Prior to the election, November 1st through 8th, we did see personally here in our store a massive jump in gun sales, people, as of course people were preparing for Clinton to win. However, in January, we see a pretty significant drop. We see a drop of about 500,000 background checks. And in February, we see a drop of about 400,000 background checks. Now, I can only speculate that that drop in demand was likely caused, obviously, due to the election and the fact that prior to the election in early November, people were buying up so many firearms that they had already purchased what they were planning on purchasing anyway prior to the election, and they wanted to make sure that they were getting into their gun stores before the election took place to make sure they wanted to get what they were interested in getting anyway, in case Clinton won and they were no longer able to procure those firearms. Also, keep in mind, firearms up to this point, basically the right to own them, has been on the chopping block for the past 8 years. So now we finally get to a pro Second Amendment president who is endorsed by the NRA, and now we're seeing a point where people can kind of sit back and relax and not have to worry so much about things like AR-15s and other similar style rifles not being removed from possible ownership. Um, Therefore, again, we see a decline in sales due to those reasons as well. All right, so let's take a look at Ruger's stocks. As we can see, they had a pretty good trend going on all the way up until November, and then the election happens, and boom, they take a massive hit, and their stocks drop pretty significantly. Now, we've seen an increase just right after November, and things are kind of stagnant all the way through January and through March, but things have really not recovered to where they were prior to the election. Here we have the same trend from the American Outdoors Brands Corp, which is now Smith & Wesson's new name, interestingly enough. Anyway, we see the exact same thing in November, a massive drop-off in the stock value, of course, to be expected. Now, the reason we focused on Smith & Wesson and Ruger is because they are the only two large, well-known brands which are publicly traded. So all the other companies are private, and therefore we cannot get the stock information on them. So here we have a statement from Chris Colloy, who is the president and COO of Ruger. In this, he's basically evaluating their fourth quarter of 2016 earnings and explaining a little bit about the drop-off in demand. So the most interesting part of this, he goes into discussing demand, and I'm going to go ahead and read this part. As we discussed during our last call on November 2nd, just prior to the election, we observed many customers spending discretionary income on concealed carry products and modern sporting rifles in recent months leading up to the election. And that's something that we saw here too. At the same time, we also observed retailers committing inventory dollars to certain product categories, such as modern sporting rifles, guilty as charged, which likely would have been in stronger demand if the election had turned out differently, given their relative vulnerability to legislative actions. The combination of increased inventory in the channel and the likely decrease in consumer demand for the near term has made the more challenging sell-through environment. So basically what he's saying here is The manufacturers are going to notice a slowdown on their end first because retailers like us did stock up pretty aggressively on things like AR-15s and concealed carry handguns, which were top sellers, uh, in preparation for the election in case it went to Clinton, which most people thought it would. Therefore, a lot of retailers are sitting there with AR-15s and AK-47s and other types of, I'm using air quotes here, assault rifles. Again, I did use air quotes, so that exonerates me from using the incorrect terminology, right? Anyway, so therefore, those things are moving very slowly, which means it's going to take some time for retailers like ourselves to dissolve that inventory and then start placing orders again, which is pretty normal. Now, we have seen a shift into other areas like 1911s and revolvers, things that people didn't really pay attention to back when they were worried about gun rights being taken away. But again, those AR-15s and other things have kind of declined. We're starting to see them come back, especially with offerings from Springfield, like the Saint is pumping a little bit more demand back into those things, but generally not nearly what it was prior to the election. Now, a lot of this is actually pretty good news for the consumer in the firearm market, as we're starting to see a lot of really good rebates coming out. Here's one from Crimson Trace. Of course, Colt has their rebates going on now as well. And we're starting to see other rebates from places like Beretta and as well from Springfield Armory. So a lot of these sorts of deals are going on. It's an attempt for the manufacturers to try and claw back some of the previously lost demand for some of these items to get people reinterested in purchasing their products. On top of that, you will also see retail gun stores like ours running tons of promotions, as we are actually given a lot of really good promotions as well within the distribution channel, which I can't really talk about. But because of that, we're able to offer a lot of firearms at blowout prices. So, of course, right now as a consumer, you're able to take advantage of those sorts of options and deals as well. Deals can be had shopping online as well. Here we have grabagun.com, cheaperthandirt.com, and of course we have Cheap Guns USA, which actually is our .com online store. So do us a favor and go check them out as well. Shameless plug. Now, with all this decline in business, it's obvious that we're going to start seeing some casualties of all this. Looks like the first to go, and this has probably been brooding for a while, but the downturn in demand was probably the nail in the coffin. But Gander Mountain has filed for bankruptcy, and they are closing 32 stores. This is an article from USA Today going over basically what's going on there. If we look directly onto their own website, we see their announcement for the same thing, which confirms that they are at least not doing too well. They're not closing their doors. They're just going to be restructuring. Of course, they do deal in more than just firearms, but I imagine the downturn in their firearm business is probably not helping.
Well, that's all we have for you today. If you enjoyed that, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button for us. If you have any comments, go ahead and leave those in the comments section. If you like this style of counter talk, where we basically bring you into the computer desktop and talk over the microphone, go ahead and let us know that. We can continue to do more like that. Anyway, this is Chris with Marksman Shooting Sports in Westfield, Indiana, and you are watching Marksman TV. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.